Hey guys, tonight we march into the mud-soaked world of mercenary life in medieval Europe, where your job is swinging a sword, your boss might be a drunk baron with no gold, and your HR department is a sack of potatoes you're supposed to split with 7 other starving men. You're not here for glory. You're here for coin. And let's be honest, even that might not show up on time, if ever. Welcome to the fine tradition of getting underpaid to get almost killed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up before dawn to the sound of boots squelching in the muck. The camp stinks of sweat, damp leather, and questionable life choices. A guy 3 feet away from you is loudly snoring into a moldy bedroll, while another is already boiling something that smells suspiciously like rat stew. You're lying on a cloak that was once a nobleman's, now rebranded as mercenary mattress. Your sword hilt digs into your side, because there's no such thing as leaving your weapon behind unless you'd like to be mugged in your sleep. You're a sellsword, not a soldier with a crest or pension or fancy helmet feathers. You fight for pay, not honor. There's no family crest on your shield, just dents from the last time someone tried to kill you. Your uniform is a mixture of stolen mail, borrowed boots, and a helmet you suspect once belonged to a very short Viking. Today's mission? You don't even know yet. Your captain, a man named Jarek who has 2 teeth and a terrible attitude, hasn't told you. That's part of the charm. You rarely know who you're fighting for, who you're fighting against, or why. Honestly, it doesn't matter. You just need to get paid. Emphasis on need. This isn't your first contract. You've served a duke who couldn't spell duke, a bishop who paid in bread, and once, memorably, a rebel who disappeared with the coin before the first battle. That was awkward. You and 30 other mercs ended up switching sides mid-skirmish. No hard feelings. It was business. The other side had cheese. Breakfast, such as it is, arrives. A soggy crust of black bread and a half-spoon of boiled barley. You eat slowly to convince yourself there's more. The guy next to you eats his in 3 bites, then eyes yours. You lean away. In mercenary camps, manners are optional and theft is inevitable. By midday, you're lined up with your unit. Jarek announces you've been hired by Lord Edric of something or other to suppress an uprising. Translation: someone's peasants are tired of taxes. You're not even sure which town. Geography isn't your strong suit. Honestly, neither is loyalty. Edric's man, who looks more like a clerk than a warlord, hands Jarek a scroll. Jarek squints at it, snorts, and says, "We're promised half up front." You don't cheer. You've heard that before. You know better. You'll believe it when the coin jingles in your pouch. Your group starts marching. 5 miles later, still no coin. Jarek keeps muttering. Some of the others talk about quitting. But where would you go? Towns don't like armed wanderers, and the last time you tried to rest in a village, a baker threw a ladle at your head. As the sun dips low, you set up camp again, this time in a half-burned barn. The roof leaks. A donkey stares at you the entire evening with deep judgment. No sign of the promised gold. Instead, you get a speech about loyalty and duty. From a man who once stabbed someone over a missing sausage. Inspiring. At some point during the night, a new rumor slithers through the hay piles. There is no gold. Lord Edric's coffers are under review. You're not entirely sure what that means, but you're pretty sure it translates to, you'll be lucky to get a rusty horseshoe. Still, you don't leave. You're a mercenary. This is the life you chose. Because even if the pay is late, or never comes, there's always a chance the enemy will drop their purse when they fall. And you've gotten very good at picking things up quickly. The next morning begins with the unmistakable sound of someone loudly vomiting behind a haystack. A mixture of spoiled stew and nerves, probably. You pretend not to notice. After all, maintaining the illusion of dignity is the only luxury you've got left. You shift your armor, an uncomfortable mix of boiled leather and chainmail with half the rings missing, and hope today doesn't involve arrows. Or fire. Or arrows on fire. Because those are notoriously bad for job security. Jarek assembles the squad with his usual pep talk. Don't die unless I tell you to. Motivational. You suspect he missed his calling as a bard. The job today is simple on paper. Escort a caravan belonging to Lord Edric's cousin to a nearby stronghold. The catch. Bandits. Lots of them. And they're mercenaries too. Great. You're basically fighting your own LinkedIn connections. You set off behind a pair of oxen pulling crates full of grain, textiles, and something that smells suspiciously like pickled fish. The nobleman in charge, a young lad named Sir Willen, insists on riding a white horse while wearing polished plate armor. It's almost offensively clean. You count 3 mud puddles you'd love to push him into. But alas, you're being paid, allegedly, to protect him, not embarrass him. Around midday, your group reaches a narrow path flanked by forest. It's the kind of place that screams ambush, and you don't have to wait long. One arrow whizzes past your head, too close. You don't scream, but you do reconsider all your life choices. Cell's word, you remind yourself. Glory and gold. Mostly mud and regret, though. The fight is messy. The enemy mercenaries are scrappy and desperate, much like you. You clash swords with a man who looks like he hasn't bathed in a decade. He yells something incoherent, possibly an insult or maybe just a sneeze. You parry, trip, roll in a puddle, and somehow end up on top of him. Victory. Technically. After about 20 minutes of hacking, shouting, and a lot of slipping, the bandits retreat. Sir Willen cheers like he did something heroic. You count the coin pouches left behind. Not enough to cover your last meal, but better than nothing. Still, your actual employer, the mysterious Lord Edric, has yet to pay the initial promised gold. It's becoming something of a theme. Back at camp, the victory feast is, predictably, stale bread and watery ale. Someone suggests robbing Edric instead of working for him. You laugh harder than you should. But the truth is, that joke has teeth. In this line of work, today's ally can be tomorrow's loot source. Morality is a luxury for people who don't sleep in dirt. One guy, Boren, a veteran with a lopsided grin, tells you about the time he accepted payment in land. Turns out the land was a frozen bog where sheep went to die. Another got paid in wine, drank it all, and forgot where he left his sword for a week. Bartering is common, and so is disappointment. Once, a whole unit of crossbowmen mutinied after being paid in cabbages. There are whispers around the fire that some mercenaries make deals with multiple lords and switch sides mid-battle, depending on which direction the wind, and gold, blows. You can't really judge them. Loyalty is thin when your stomach is thinner. Historians might argue whether these tactics were betrayal or strategy. You just call it Tuesday. Before bed, Jarek pulls you aside. We're heading toward a border skirmish in 2 days, he says. Lord Edric says he'll pay once we arrive. Of course he does. You nod, suppressing the urge to roll your eyes. By now, you know the drill. You might get paid. Or you might get a thank you and a mule missing a leg. You crawl into your blanket that smells faintly of mildew and bad decisions. Overhead, the stars shimmer in a sky too beautiful for the life you're leading. You think briefly about quitting. Becoming a tanner, maybe. Or a baker. But then again, bakers have to deal with flour taxes. And tanners smell worse than mercenaries. No, you'll stick to the sword. It may not pay well, or at all, but it does make for good stories. And you've got plenty of those. Even if most end with, and then they ran off with the money. By dawn, your shoulders ache like you've been trampled by a noble's hunting party, which, come to think of it, did happen once. You stretch under the pretense of checking your gear, but really, you're just hoping your back doesn't audibly pop in front of the others. Reputation matters, even when you sleep in a ditch and get paid in promises. You're a professional, after all. Breakfast is a tragic affair. A bit of dry oatcake, a smear of onion jam, and a gulp of lukewarm beer. It's not that bad, all things considered, until you remember the rats got into the jam last night. You try not to think about that. Protein, maybe. The day's job is guarding a gate while Lord Edric meets with a bishop about troop support. Sounds simple. In theory. In practice, it involves standing still in armor that heats like a brick oven, while trying not to look bored or, worse, broke. You glance sideways at your fellow guards. Everyone's trying to act like they meant to take this post. No one did. Then you overhear it. Coin. Edric and the bishop talking money. You lean just a little closer. Something about delayed payments and outstanding obligations. In other words, you're not getting paid today. Again. You suppress the urge to groan. Or throw your helmet at someone important. Jurek calls a meeting behind the stables that night. The good news, he says, is that Lord Edric didn't fire us. A few people clap sarcastically. The bad news is, there's still no coin. He says we'll be paid once we escort his niece to the capital. You wonder if Edric has any relatives who aren't being escorted by underpaid sword swingers. Maybe a third cousin who needs a ride to the bakery? Someone asks if the niece is at least pretty. The answer, she's 8. That shuts everyone up for a minute. The next few days are oddly peaceful, which, for a mercenary, is suspicious. You travel by cart, walking beside the horses with a hand on your sword and one eye on the horizon. You pass peasants who eye you with a mix of fear and disdain. Scum with steel, they mutter when they think you can't hear. You pretend you didn't. They're not wrong. You camp near a bridge where, according to Borin, the last mercenary band who tried to cross without paying tolls got stripped and tied to the posts. Not killed, just left as a warning. You add bridge fees to your growing list of expenses no one warned you about. As you travel, you begin noticing a pattern. The nobles you work for all seem to think the same thing, that mercenaries are tools, not people. Use them, toss them, rinse, repeat. But you're not a sword, they don't clean themselves, and they definitely don't work for free. You start to wonder if your best bet is to become a freelancer, the kind that changes sides if the other lord coughs up a little more coin. Historians still debate whether this was dishonorable or just common sense. Most mercs you know, they call it business. At one village, you get paid in chickens. Not as bad as it sounds, until you realize chickens are impossible to carry in a coin pouch and have no idea how to keep quiet during a stealth mission. You sell yours for a pair of boots 2 sizes too big. Worth it. One night, a fellow merc named Lena shares a rumor. A nearby baron is hiring and actually paying. In silver. Not promises. The kind of silver that jingles. You all look at each other and quietly file that information away. Loyalty is a seesaw, and right now, Edric's side of the board is looking mighty empty. Still, you've made it this far without starving, bleeding out, or being hanged for desertion. That's a win. As you lie back on your cloak and stare at the stars, you can't help but chuckle. You've had a dozen employers, worn 3 different crests, and fought for causes you barely remember. But one thing stays the same, the pay is always late. And yet, here you are. Still marching, still swinging, still waiting on the silver that's always just one battle away. You wake up to shouting. Not battlefield shouting, no swords clashing or arrows whistling, just the kind that means someone's stolen something or someone's accusing someone of stealing something. You groan, roll over, and prepare for another morning in the professional chaos that is mercenary life. Turns out, it's over the food rations. Again. Jurek's arguing with the quartermaster about the fact that somehow, miraculously, 2 whole sacks of barley have disappeared. And no, you don't believe rats carry them off in the night, unless those rats also left boot prints and chewed through exactly 0 things. You stay out of it, mostly because anyone who volunteers to help sort it out usually ends up carrying water or being yelled at by the cook. You're assigned to perimeter duty, which means trudging along a muddy fence line with a spear that's more decorative than useful. You pass a boy from the local village who eyes you with the kind of curiosity reserved for stray dogs and traveling musicians. He asks if you're rich. You laugh harder than you should. The truth is, Being a mercenary is a financial gamble where the house always wins. Sometimes you get paid in actual coin. Sometimes you get paid in kind, food, clothing, or a certificate that supposedly promises payment from a noble treasury that no longer exists. One time, your unit got a cart of turnips. Not gold. Not even salted pork. Turnips. You once heard of a merc band who accepted land instead of coin. They were ecstatic until they realized that land meant a soggy field with 0 tenants, 3 feuding tax claims, and a ghost problem. Even now, some swear that's why mercenary groups stopped taking real estate deals. After lunch, flatbread and something that was once cheese, you find yourself summoned to Lord Edric's camp. That's either very good or very bad. You dust yourself off and try not to look too surprised when you're told you've been promoted. It's less a promotion and more of a responsibility dump. The officer in charge of supply logistics has vanished, ran off, or was reassigned, depending on who you ask. Either way, you're now in charge of making sure the troops get fed, clothed, and, laughably, paid. The good news, you now sleep under a tarp instead of the stars. The bad news, you now have to talk to Edric's steward, who thinks mercenaries are one step below diseased pigs. You spend half your time chasing rumors about delayed pay wagons, and the other half fielding complaints about the quality of ale. At night, you take stock of supplies. Bread's low. Salted fish is questionable. Ale barrels are half empty and already claimed by the captain's favorites. You try to request more funding. The steward says, funds are tied up, which is code for you'll get paid when the moon turns green. Still, you learn things. Like how some nobles intentionally withhold pay to keep mercenaries desperate enough not to desert. Or how certain captains skim off the top before it reaches the soldiers. One scribe swears the crown budgeted for your unit 3 times what you've actually seen. Whether that's true or just bitter gossip, well, history doesn't agree. Morale dips. Jurek starts mumbling about mutiny. Lena keeps sharpening her blade like she's preparing to have a very pointed conversation with someone. You try to keep the peace. Remind them that as long as Edric's enemies are alive, he still needs you. And as long as he needs you, payment is still possible. Late one evening, you overhear Edric himself. He's at the fire, speaking with his advisor. If they desert, he says, let them. More coin for the knights. You freeze. It's one thing to be unpaid, it's another to be disposable. You go back to camp quiet, thinking, you're a sword for hire. But even a sword gets dull when mistreated. And when that happens, sometimes it finds another hand to wield it. Morning brings fog, and more excuses. You've sent word twice now about the missing payment for last month, and the scribe who was supposed to arrive with the accounts is apparently delayed due to weather. You suspect the weather he's referring to is financial drizzle, possibly fraud. But hey, at least it's not raining for real. You pull on your boots, squint into the pale mist, and sigh. Time for another day as the army's underpaid middle manager. Today, your camp is on the move. Lord Edric has decided the campaign must press forward, likely because staying still means paying you, and moving means postponing that awkward conversation. You help load carts, double-check inventory, which somehow keeps getting smaller, and ride behind the baggage train on a mule named Turnip. Yes, someone named the mule Turnip. You don't ask why. By midday, you hear news. A rival mercenary company, the Iron Hounds, is rumored to have switched sides. Sold themselves to Edric's enemies in exchange for, you guessed it, actual gold. It's the talk of the ranks. Some call it betrayal. Others call it good business. You're somewhere in between. You understand desperation. This rumor lights a fire under Edric's camp. Officers become paranoid. Edric's steward begins randomly inspecting bedrolls for signs of treason. One guy gets punished for having a coin from a rival realm. You stop carrying your emergency stash, burying it behind the latrines instead. Safe and disgusting. Perfect. The next evening, you receive new orders. You're now responsible for leading a detachment of fighters to secure a nearby village that supposedly owes Edric grain. No one has confirmed this debt. Doesn't matter. Edric needs food, and you're the sword with a grocery list. You arrive to find the villagers confused and frightened. They're poor, muddy, and clearly barely feeding themselves. Their elder insists they've already paid their taxes. You nod politely. Then you take half their barley anyway. You hate yourself for it, but soldiers don't eat on sympathy. Back at camp, some celebrate the loot. Others avoid eye contact. Guilt simmers beneath the surface, but survival always wins. That night, the cook serves soup that tastes faintly of regret, and definitely of old onions. Later, you meet with Lena by the fire. She's been keeping a secret log of promised pay, actual pay, and all the donated supplies your unit has acquired. She shows you the numbers. They don't add up. If anything, they subtract. Violently. They owe us double, she mutters, at least. You agree. But what can you do? History books talk about noble causes and grand victories. They rarely mention the tired guy who guarded the beans and tried to make sense of a broken payment system. They forget how many mercenaries turned against their employers, not because they loved the enemy, but because they loved not starving. You crawl into your tent knowing tomorrow you'll likely collect more taxes that were never owed. Or maybe you'll get paid. Or maybe the Iron Hounds will show up and you'll be fighting people you drank with last year. Sleep doesn't come easy, not in this line of work. Sleep is short-lived. The night watchman shakes your shoulder just before dawn, whispering something about missing horses. You groggily pull yourself upright and stumble out into the cold grayness of a pre-sunrise camp. 3 horses are gone, just gone, along with a cart of supplies and one of your more disgruntled spearmen. You mentally tick off who's most likely to follow him and sigh. Add that to the ledger, 1 unpaid man, 1 missing breakfast. You organize a search party, though you don't expect much. You've seen enough desertions to know they rarely get reversed. A few men mutter about how they might do the same. You tell them to shut up, half joking. The other half is deeply not. By noon, the conversation in camp has shifted. Lord Edric, ever generous with orders but stingy with coin, has announced a delay in payment. Again. He blames unforeseen tax complications. What he means is that the King's Court hasn't reimbursed him, and so he's not reimbursing you. Classic trickle-down failure. You meet up with Lena and the rest of the inner circle of your unit, sitting around a battered map with grim expressions. One of the younger men asks, "Why don't we just go home?" There's a beat of silence before everyone bursts into laughter, not because it's funny, but because it's absurd. Home is a pile of debts, bad weather, and fields full of rocks. At least here, there's a chance of earning something, even if it's stolen. Lena brings up an old tactic, the pay-yourself tax. A polite term for raiding. Not enemies, just locals too weak to fight back. You cringe at the idea but admit it's happened before. Many times, actually. History books sanitize it. They say, supplemented their wages with war spoils. What they don't say is, looted grandma's soup pot. A few hours later, you march out toward another village. It's your turn to collect. You bring along a small detachment of disciplined fighters, just enough to show force, not so many as to be overtly threatening. The balance is delicate. You're here for coins, not corpses. When you arrive, the village headman greets you with a strained smile. He's clearly been through this before. You exchange pleasantries. He brings out a small box of silver rings, hoping it will be enough. You pretend to consider it seriously, then nod. It's not enough, but it's all he has, and you've got a heart, despite the layers of mud and cynicism. As you head back, one of your men asks if this is what being a mercenary really is, squeezing blood from turnips. You give a shrug. At least turnips don't bleed. That night, Edric's herald arrives with good news. Coin is coming. He swears it. Just a few more days. You roll your eyes and tell your men to hold tight. A little more patience, a little more hunger, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be handed a bag of silver instead of another promise. Lena mutters, "We should start charging interest." You nod. Not that it would help. By now, you've started to measure your days not by the rising and setting of the sun, but by the scraping of bowls and the clink of empty coin purses. Word spreads that a fresh campaign is being assembled, this time against a rebellious baron holed up in a mountain fortress. The promise? 3 months pay up front. The reality? You get half a pouch of mixed coins and a good faith letter signed in wax. And yes, Lena checked, the wax is genuine. Too bad the signature probably isn't worth more than a burnt boot. You and your men pack up anyway. No one dares complain, because the alternative is hunger. You march out with the rest of the army, past dry fields and gray hills. The weather seems to be conspiring against you. Mud thick as stew, wind that smells faintly of manure, and a sky that can't decide between raining and brooding. The fortress comes into view 3 days later. It's smaller than expected, but perched high like a smug cat, nestled between 2 cliffs. That's where the Real challenge begins, not in battle, but in waiting. You camp for days, then weeks. The siege drags on, mostly just a staring contest punctuated by the occasional arrow or insult flung from the walls. To pass time, you and your companions gamble with chicken bones and stones, play liar's dice with rules that shift every evening, and retell the same 6 stories over and over, each one increasingly exaggerated. Someone claims to have once eaten stew made from dragon meat. Someone else swears he once kissed a queen. Lena raises an eyebrow and reminds him that queen was a goat. Everyone laughs. Food grows short. Again. Rations now include something that used to be bread but could double as masonry. Still, at least no one's shooting at you today. Or paying you either, but let's not dwell. One night, you overhear 2 officers arguing near the command tent. Apparently, the Baron has sent a message offering to surrender, on the condition that his lands not be pillaged. Edric wants to agree. His scribe thinks it's a trick. You just want it to be over. You wonder if you'll actually see the promised coin, or if you'll once again receive a slice of sheep and a shrug. By morning, it's decided. A parley. You're ordered to prepare for entry. When the gates finally creak open, it feels surreal. No battle. No blood. Just awkward politeness between men who probably would have gutted each other yesterday. As you march through the fortress, eyes peeled for betrayal, you spot a well-fed dog and nearly cry from jealousy. A few of the Baron's soldiers watch you like you're rats with swords. You give them a grin that says, "Yes, and proud of it." Back in camp, Lena jokes that your next career should be tax collector. You say that would involve too much paperwork. She says, "At least they get paid." That night, you sit by the fire, legs aching, half a ration in hand, and a nagging question in your head. Why do you keep doing this? And you already know the answer. A week after the siege ends, you're still in camp, still unpaid, and still waiting for someone, anyone, to say the magic words, "Here's your coin." Instead, the only thing you're handed is a slightly damp piece of parchment outlining the terms of delayed disbursement, which sounds fancier than it is. Basically, it says, "We'll get around to it." Maybe. The officers have gone quiet. Edric spends most of his time in his tent, supposedly writing reports. Lena thinks he's just hiding from angry men with swords and empty stomachs. You're inclined to agree. Rumors begin to swirl. Some say the treasury was ambushed, others whisper that the Baron's gold was fake to begin with. One soldier claims the coin was cursed and melted overnight. That one's definitely not true. Probably. Eventually, you're told to move out. Not to another battle, but to an outpost further south. No explanation. Just pack up, march, and try not to mutiny on the way. The mood among your company shifts. Some joke, some stew. A few quietly slip away during the night. You don't blame them. But you stay. Maybe out of loyalty. Maybe out of habit. Maybe because you've gotten used to the uncertainty. It's strangely comforting, like a bad smell you no longer notice. On the road, a merchant caravan crosses your path. They look surprised to see so many armed mercenaries walking without purpose. You try to look intimidating, but your boot sole is flapping and Lena's trying to stitch her tunic with what might be horsehair. The merchant offers to trade. You can't buy, obviously, but he's happy to barter. You exchange a dented buckle and a bit of song for a round of bread and what might be cheese. It smells terrible, tastes worse, and is gone in 2 bites. At the outpost, you're greeted by a man in a too clean tunic with 2 soft hands. He looks at your weathered crew like you've just crawled out of a swamp, which, to be fair, you basically have. He reads off some official decree. By order of the crown, your service is temporarily suspended pending financial clarification. You translate that into mercenary speak. Go away, we're broke. There's no coin. Not even a promise this time. Just vague apologies and a suggestion that you seek opportunity elsewhere. As if you're merchants. As if war is a hobby. You and your companions find a tavern nearby. It's run down, half-roofed, and smells like regret. But the ale is strong and the fire is warm. You sit with Lena, who toasts to unpaid glory. You clink mugs. It's the loudest sound in the room. The table beside you hosts 2 men with maps and coin purses. They glance at your group, then lean in, whispering. Another job? You wonder. Another battle, another maybe payday, another story to stack on the pile. You sigh, lean back, and listen to the fire crackle. Maybe tomorrow, you'll take the offer. Or maybe you'll finally sell your sword and become a baker like you swore you would 3 campaigns ago. Probably not, though. Flour doesn't pay as well as promises. And you, unfortunately, are very rich in those. You wake up sore, not from battle, but from sleeping on a tavern bench. The fire has long since burned out, and someone's used your cloak as a mop. Charming. Outside, the morning air carries a crisp bite and the sound of wagon wheels grinding over mud. Another day, another chance to chase a coin that probably doesn't exist. The 2 map-bearing men from last night are still here, hunched over their parchment like conspirators in a very low-budget heist. One of them notices you rubbing your neck and gives a nod, then flicks a silver coin into the air. It glints in the morning light before landing squarely in your lap. You interested? He asks. Now, any mercenary worth their rust knows never to say yes right away. So you squint, stretch, and mutter something non-committal like, depends who needs killing. They laugh. Not killing. Escort work. Cargo. 2 weeks. Pays good, assuming we arrive in one piece. Assuming. That's a favorite word among people who don't carry swords. But you agree. Because the alternative is sitting in a half-roofed tavern swapping lice with Lena while she crafts poetry about eating beet soup every day. At least movement feels like progress. Maybe you'll even get paid this time. 2 days later, you're part of a caravan, trotting along beside carts filled with barrels, bolts of cloth, and one suspiciously locked crate that hums when the wind hits it just right. You don't ask. In mercenary math, curiosity is inversely proportional to how many limbs you'd like to keep. The path winds through a forest that smells like damp moss and fox. Every bird call makes someone twitch. You pass a village where even the chickens look nervous. The local lord apparently can't keep bandits off the roads, which is why your new employers hired guards in the first place. Still, no one's paid you yet. You asked. Once. The response, payment upon delivery. Classic. That phrase has haunted mercenaries since the invention of pockets. One night, by the fire, you hear a story. One of the older guards, a bald man with a voice like gravel soup, tells of a captain who demanded full pay up front. The employer agreed. The captain took the coin, disappeared into the forest, and was never seen again. Legend, the man says, staring into the flames. Or genius. You think about that. What would you do with your pay, if you ever got it? A new sword? A real bed? Maybe a bath longer than 60 seconds? Lena jokes she'd buy a cow. Not to milk. Just to look at. It's been years since I've seen a calm face. You laugh more than you should at that. You blame the ale. Or the smoke. or the fact that your boots have holes big enough to smuggle rats. Then finally, you reach the drop point, a ruined watchtower overlooking a valley. Your employers unload the goods. You scan the hills for movement, bandits, soldiers, or worse, tax collectors. The handoff happens fast. A scroll is exchanged, the crate disappears into another cart, and a bag is tossed at your feet. It hits the ground with a jangle. Silver. Real silver. You blink. This might be the first job in months that actually paid. Everyone's a little stunned, like the moment after thunder. You divvy up the coin. It's not much, but enough to buy a hot meal and a new pair of socks. Which, in your world, is basically a fortune. Lena stares at her share, then nudges you. Still thinking about the cow. You snort, pocket your silver, and look up at the stars. For once, you're not broke. Just tired. It's a good kind of tired, though. The kind that means you survived, and you might even have a story worth telling. Assuming anyone ever believes it. Back in town, your boots are caked with dried mud, your sword's got a new dent, and your coin pouch jingles with all the weight of a modest but hard-earned success. The innkeeper greets you like an old friend, which really just means he knows you can finally pay off your tab. You toss him a coin and reclaim your favorite seat by the fire, which, after enough ale, almost feels like home. But mercenary life is never still for long. A few days into your so-called vacation, you hear whispers, a wealthy merchant in need of muscle. Not for a caravan this time, but for something trickier, guarding a warehouse full of imported silks and spices while a local noble threatens to reclaim the land it sits on. You sign up, of course. Mostly because the merchant offers coin up front. Well, half. You're not naive enough to expect the second half without incident. The warehouse is a squat stone building near the harbor, its windows boarded up, its doors chained shut. You and a few other swords for hire camp out inside, surrounded by crates marked in languages you can't read and spices that make your nose tingle. Lena shows up too, grinning like this is just another pub crawl, except with better smells and more potential for stabbing. The first few nights are quiet. Too quiet. Which, in your world, means something is definitely about to go wrong. And sure enough, it does. Around midnight on the fifth night, you hear it, the distinct scrape of metal on stone. Someone's trying to force the back door. You and Lena exchange glances, nod, and draw your swords. The rest of the crew stirs, blinking off their wine naps and grabbing whatever weapons are nearest. Mostly short swords, one sharpened broom handle, and in one case, a chair leg. The would-be thieves are quick and quiet, dressed in the colors of the noble who wants this place gone. Their leader, a man with a ridiculous feather in his cap, steps into the torchlight and scowls. "Stand down," he commands, like he expects obedience from people paid specifically to ignore such orders. You don't stand down. What follows is messy, clumsy, and absolutely not the graceful ballet of combat bards like to sing about. Someone steps on a spice jar and slips. Lena clocks a guy in the temple with a sack of cloves. You trip over a coil of rope and accidentally stab someone in the foot. But you win. Or at least, the attackers flee after enough bruises and bruised egos. The merchant shows up the next morning, horrified at the mess but grateful the goods are intact. He pays you the remaining silver, without haggling, even, which is rare enough to make you suspicious. You later learn the noble was warned off not by the merchant, but by rumors, that the warehouse was guarded by a half-mad mercenary crew who fought like drunken wolves. Apparently, your spice-fueled chaos impressed someone. You celebrate with actual food, not just crusts and stew. And this time, you pay for Lena's wine too. She raises her mug. Here's to jobs that pay. Occasionally. You laugh. And to fights that smell like cinnamon. When the coins finally land in your palm, it's oddly anticlimactic. They're not especially shiny. Not especially heavy. Just cold little promises of survival, and perhaps, if you're lucky, a slightly better bed than a pile of straw. You tuck them away in your belt pouch and immediately start thinking about how fast they'll disappear. You've learned the mercenaries' economy is less about wealth and more about timing. Get paid before the Lord's debts catch up with him. Buy bread before the baker hears where you got the money. Spend your silver before some war starts and the coin becomes as worthless as yesterday's stew. This time, though, you're feeling bold. So you do what many mercenaries try once in their lives. You attempt to save it. You approach a moneylender with your modest stack of silver. He sits behind a counter so polished it reflects your face and your exhaustion. He asks no questions, just hands you a scrap of parchment with some scribbles and a wax seal. Congratulations, you now have a deposit. You're still broke, of course, but now you're broke with documentation. Word spreads quickly that you've been paid. Suddenly, people who didn't speak to you last week are offering you deals, favors, or investment opportunities, which usually means gambling or extremely suspicious goats. Lena warns you not to blow it all. Which is rich, considering she once lost a week's pay betting on a duck race. You try to play it smart. You buy a new scabbard, just one, not three. You patch your boots instead of replacing them. You even visit a barber, which is either a luxury or a defense strategy, depending on how much hair you've let grow over your eyes. Then comes the inevitable letter. Another city. Another job. A client who insists they need a well-disciplined mercenary, not realizing that's mostly code for "won't rob me mid-contract." You accept. Because that's what you do. But travel isn't free. Horses cost coin. So do ferries, bribes at checkpoints, and the occasional emergency ale. By the time you arrive in the next town, your pouch is again whisper-light. Still, you show up at the gates, sword on your back, boots dusty but your scabbard glinting with recent polish. That little gleam, ironically, is what gets you the job. The client, an anxious noble with more land than sense, decides you look professional. You meet your new crew. A grizzled archer who says nothing and sharpens his arrows by the fire. A wiry kid barely old enough to shave, who stares at your sword like it's made of pure gold. And a healer who, after one look at your calloused hands, mutters, "Bet you'll be needing stitches within the week." They're probably right. Over a firelit dinner of salted pork and beans, someone asks what you'll do with your next payment. Buy a new tent? Replace that fraying cloak? You think about it for a moment, then smirk. Probably save it, you say. The whole crew laughs. Because everyone knows, no one actually saves their pay. At least, not for long. It's payday again. Well, supposed to be. You and your unit stand outside a drafty stone keep, waiting for the steward to appear with a chest of silver he promised. You shift from foot to foot, trying to keep the cold out of your boots. Someone coughs. Someone else mutters about a missing chest. You all know the truth. Getting paid as a mercenary is only slightly more reliable than predicting the weather with a dead squirrel. Eventually, the steward appears, flanked by two nervous guards. He's carrying a ledger instead of a chest. Bad sign. "I regret to inform you," he begins, in that oily voice only clerks and liars seem to master. "There's been a delay in the treasury." Delay. That's rich. You've heard every excuse in the book. Coin was stolen, taxes haven't come in, the Duke's nephew spent it all on horses. Or women. Or gambling on horses with women. You're told you'll be paid next week. Again. And like any seasoned mercenary, you do what's customary in this situation. You pretend to accept it while immediately starting to scavenge. Lena barters an old dagger for 2 loaves of bread and a mug of something that's technically ale. The archer sharpens his arrows with extra focus. You find a small town inn with loose floorboards and check for coins underneath them, just in case. Nothing, of course. Someone got there first. That night, you're back around a fire with a group of equally broke professionals. Someone suggests looting the steward's pantry, just for food. Another suggests holding the steward for ransom, as a joke. You all laugh, because if you don't, you might cry. Still, no one's serious. You're soldiers, not bandits, at least, not today. Here's the part history books forget. Mercenaries weren't just blades for hire. You were also accountants, negotiators, and part-time detectives trying to track down your own wages. Some soldiers got creative. There's a story about a mercenary captain who took a noble's horse as collateral and rode it across the continent until someone coughed up the gold. Historians still argue whether it was theft or clever financial pressure. Either way, the horse had an interesting retirement. The truth is, the pay system was never built for people like you. Feudal lords operated on trust and land and oaths. You operate on silver and soup. And when the silver dries up, so does the loyalty. Eventually, someone in your group sighs and pulls out their rain pouch, the emergency stash. Everyone else pretends not to look while secretly tallying how much you might have. The healer offers to sell some homemade ointment. You don't ask what's in it. You don't want to know. Next morning, the steward's guards appear again, this time with a tiny chest, barely enough to clink. Partial payment, they announce. It's less than you're owed, but more than nothing. So you split it. You even flip a coin to settle who gets the odd copper. As you tuck your share into your belt, Lena asks, "Worth it?" You shrug. It buys dinner. And sometimes, that's enough. There's something deeply humbling about getting paid in salted fish. But here you are, a hardened sword for hire, staring down at 3 slabs of dried herring and a lumpy wool blanket, your latest payment. You're told it's worth 4 silver coins. You're also told you should be grateful. You smile politely and immediately start calculating how many bowls of stew you can trade the fish for. The blanket might be worth a mug of mead if you find someone especially cold or especially gullible. Welcome to the barter economy of the underpaid mercenary. Cash flow was rarely smooth in the medieval world. Coinage itself fluctuated wildly. Sometimes the coins were pure. Other times the silver had been stretched so thin with base metals it was practically decorative. So when the coin dried up, mercenaries like you got creative. Sometimes the local lord paid in grain. Once, you received half a pig and a very defensive goat. Another time, your company was handed ownership of a crumbling windmill with rights to the surrounding field mice. You still don't know if that was a joke. This improvisational payroll meant developing a few unexpected skills, like haggling. You've bartered boots for bread, sharpened swords for a place to sleep, even traded a polished helmet for a sheepdog with a limp. You named him Captain. He didn't bark much, but he looked tough. Of course, this meant your day didn't end when the fighting did. After the dust settled, you became a walking merchant. The campfire wasn't just for warmth, it was a marketplace, a stock exchange, and occasionally a cooking show gone wrong. And through it all, there was always the one who kept records. You know the type. The guy with ink-stained fingers and a journal tied to his belt with string. He claimed to be tracking payments so that when the real money arrived, everyone would get what they were owed. Spoiler: the real money never arrived. Historians have pointed out that mercenaries were some of the earliest prototypes for modern wage workers, operating outside the feudal system's rigid expectations. Some were even union-like, groups that negotiated collectively, withheld service when cheated, or flipped sides if another client offered more. Academic debate continues about whether this made you early entrepreneurs or just really stubborn freelancers with swords. You remember a time when your captain refused payment in livestock, declaring, "I won't be bribed with chickens." The local baron, unimpressed, countered with, "Fine, have onions instead." The captain paused and said, "How many onions?" That was the negotiation. Even now, as you pack your few belongings and slip your bartered herring into a cloth pouch, you know that tomorrow might bring a new job, a new patron, maybe even coin. Or maybe more onions. You glance at the stars overhead and wonder if one of them is for mercenaries like you. Fighters who didn't always get paid, but always got by. By now, you've realized being a mercenary means you're not just in the business of fighting, you're also in the business of surviving bureaucracy. Today, it's not swords that'll test your nerve, it's paperwork. Or, more accurately, a nervous scribe with a feather quill and a suspiciously long list of names. You line up with the others under a sun that has absolutely no respect for your hangover, hoping your name hasn't been spelled wrong this time. Again. Your job. Collect your overdue pay. The real challenge. Proving you actually exist. In theory, mercenary companies kept ledgers, who fought, when, for whom, and how much they were owed. But these records were rarely flawless. Ink smudges, names misspelled, entire pages torn out and used as kindling. One time, a clerk accidentally wrote Hugo the Tall as huge and tall, then forgot what he'd meant and gave your coin to someone else entirely. That's how you ended up learning to memorize every detail about your service. Battles fought, scars earned, the name of the guy who screamed louder than his horse. You kept a mental file system sharper than your dagger because payment often came down to who could argue the loudest and with the most dramatic limp. Some soldiers tried forging tokens of service, bits of cloth, metal pins, scribbled letters, anything that looked official enough to trick a tired paymaster. And it worked, sometimes. Other times, it got you tossed out of camp with a dented nose and a lifetime ban from future employment opportunities. To complicate things, the money didn't always come from the person who hired you. Kings outsourced payments to nobles, who outsourced to treasurers, who outsourced to that one guy who once dated your cousin. By the time the silver trickled down to you, it had probably passed through 7 hands, 3 tax schemes, and a wine-soaked wager. Historians still debate whether this payment chaos was deliberate. Some believe it kept mercenaries loyal. After all, if you hadn't been paid yet, maybe you'd stick around hoping it would happen. Others argue it was just classic medieval mismanagement. Too many ledgers, too few accountants, and 0 working systems. You remember one particularly infamous campaign where the payment finally arrived, in the form of a cart full of moldy coins. Apparently, the treasury had flooded the winter before, but silver is silver, even if it smells like cheese and regret. So you took your share, wiped off the worst of the grime, and told yourself it was better than onions. Barely. Eventually, you learned the real mercenary code: don't fight for gold. Fight for what gold might buy: food, warmth, boots that don't whisper betrayal every time it rains. And maybe, if you're lucky, a quiet evening with a good story and a stronger ale. Tonight, as you tuck away your hard-earned, slightly sour-smelling coins, you laugh. Not because it's funny, but because in a world where payment is a gamble, sometimes laughter is all you can afford. You think the job is done when the sword is sheathed and the coins, finally, rest heavy in your pocket. But a mercenary's life rarely ends with payment. No, now comes the part where you figure out what to do after you've survived. Spoiler alert, there's no retirement plan. Some mercenaries try to settle down, buy a tiny plot of land, maybe raise goats instead of hell. You consider it for exactly 3 seconds before realizing you wouldn't even know how to hold a plow without trying to stab someone with it. Others join new campaigns, constantly chasing another payday, another battlefield, another story that'll make them sound more important at the tavern than they ever felt in the mud. You, on the other hand, head to the nearest town with something even more important than gold: tales. Because the coin will eventually run out, spent on ale, boots, or bribes. But stories? Stories can feed you for weeks. You walk into the tavern, drop your pack with a thud that turns heads, and order something that isn't hardtack or regret. The barkeep raises an eyebrow, silently asking what a half-dented sellsword is doing in her establishment. You just smile and begin. You talk about the campaign where everyone got trench foot except that one guy who never took his boots off, even when bathing. You recall the nobleman who tried to pay you with land he didn't own, and the cook who could make stew out of anything, including, once, a boot. You leave out the worst bits. You always do. The cold nights with no fire. The men who didn't come back. The promises broken by people whose armor was shinier than their morals. That's not tavern talk. That's for when you're alone, staring into a flame too small to warm your regrets. Somewhere in that crowd is a younger version of you. Maybe he still thinks glory is real. Maybe he hasn't lost enough teeth to doubt it yet. You could warn him, tell him what it's really like. But you don't. He'll learn. You did. And so you drink. Slowly. Because this cup is one you earned. Not begged, not stolen, not wagered in a bet over who could sharpen a blade fastest. It's yours. Historians still argue over how much mercenaries shaped the wars they fought in. Were they decisive agents of chaos or just well-armed filler in someone else's story? But in this moment, you don't care what they debate. Because you were there. You lived it. Even if you didn't always get paid. Now the tavern fades. The flicker of candles dims behind your eyelids. The sound of clinking mugs melts into a distant hum, like rain on a thatched roof. And the weight of your sword, your coin pouch, your whole muddied past, softens. You let it all drift. The nights you laughed. The ones you didn't. The smell of smoke in your cloak and the ache in your knees from years of sleeping on ground too stubborn to forgive you. Let them all slide into the background, like a story retold so many times it starts to sound like a dream. You're not marching anymore. Not fighting. Not bartering for stale bread or dodging arrows with your name etched on the tip. You're just here, quiet, floating somewhere between the past and sleep. The kind of sleep you don't have to earn. The kind where nobody wakes you before dawn.